We're good to go. So I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Brandon Buckley from the St. Charles Public Library, and tonight is Julia Zoltowsky. And so you've been kind of all over the green scene, I guess. You were
Yeah.
at Chicago Botanic Garden, and
hmm
then you were at a zoo out in Colorado, and now you're at the Denver Botanic Garden.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
tonight you're talking about some ghoulish plants, so we're gonna get in the Halloween spirit.
Yes. Yes, we
Perfect.
are.
Well, I will hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. I'm really excited to be here. This is one of my favorite classes to topics to really share with folks on. And as Brandon mentioned, I have been all over the place. But a lot of the plants that I talk about today, you can see at the Chicago Botanic Garden and can also plant in your own gardens if you feel so inclined to add some spooky accents to your gardening. Um, but without further ado, I would just like, if you're interested, to just type into the chat maybe what brought you here, what were you super excited about, if there's anything you're hoping to learn. Um, I'll just share a little bit. Um, I've been studying the ethnobotany of plants for quite some time, particularly poisonous plants and their medicinal uses and indigenous uses for time immemorial, really. So that's what excites me about sharing this information is that we get to talk about the spooky folklore, the interesting mythology, the winding paths that these plants have taken in religion and in their landscapes. Um, so it's all right if we don't want to share that today. I'll give you all just one more minute. Um, a lot of I'll share also what we're going to talk about too, so we can just go ahead into that. So we'll touch on some deadly plants, mostly those that are poisonous or toxic, ghastly plants, which may also be poisonous and toxic, but they give a little bit of a fright. Devil's plants, these ones are generally devilish, and some not quite so plants, mostly spooky fungi. So we get a little bit all over the place here. And as I mentioned, I think that plant folklore is important for a lot of reasons. When we start to reflect on the history of a plant's use and their cultural significance, we can start to see the evolution of this plant and even learn more from it. We can also start to deconstruct some of the stories that have been built around some of these plants and cultivate a deeper understanding that these plants have value beyond their scary spookiness, though it's quite fun to, speculate some of these stories and recognize that some of these have values in our medicine chest. Um, I will also say that none of these statements are intended to diagnose, treat, or heal any illness or disease. So if you're hearing anything in this presentation and you want to discuss that with your healthcare provider, you very much should, but do not take anything that I'm saying as something you should treat yourself with. So without further ado, we'll get into our deadly plants. The first one we're going to talk about is Brugmansia suavolens, also known as devil's breath or angel's trumpet. This plant has been found in many tropical regions, mostly from South America. However, it's been purported that because this plant's been wildly cultivated, there's no longer any wild species of Brugmansia, and so they're all in cultivation now. Um, it's also known as Tonga in what is now known as present-day Colombia. It comes from the Solanaceae family, which is important because a lot of the plants that we're going to talk about today come from this family, many nightshades. And this is one of the 7 species of flowering plants in the Solanaceae family, and it's also pollinated by moths. It's said that on Samhain, which is also known as Halloween, Ardu, who is the like a fairy leader of the dead, he leads this wild hunt, which is a big motif in a lot of European art, where there are spirits who are chasing down the living and also the dead to try to capture them to bring them back down into the underworld. So it was said that if you both saw a Brugmansia blooming and during the day, that at night you would hear that trumpet, the Brugmansia blossom trumpeting, and that would mean that the wild hunt has started and you should go inside because you may get possessed by a spirit who's trying to run away from Ardu. Um, it's also noted that if it's if you smell this blossom during the day, that someone near you may have died. Many different cultures have used, some form of this Brugmansia in a concoction with maize or tobacco. And in South America in particular, this was used to numb both slaves and wives actually into being buried alive with their dead kings. And this is kind of perhaps where some of the very first notions of zombies came from. You can write letters to the dead using this plant. If you write a letter to the dead and you stuff it inside the plant blossom and then you stamp it, you give it a little offering, like a little letter stamp, and then bury it in the ground, either at a crossroads or somewhere very close to where your loved one or the dead that you're trying to communicate is lying. It will get to them, and then you'll be able to converse with the dead. Um, it's also been it's been given to children who are considered unruly in their behavior, as a beverage to imbue them with the ancestral guidance to behave more properly. It was thought that if the children drank this beverage, that then the ancestors would speak to them and guide them more appropriately. Um, it contains alkaloids, which, some alkaloids are good for us and some alkaloids are not so great for us. These alkaloids that it contains are considered, or they are scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscyamine. And all of these alkaloids do have applications in medicine today, but generally in small doses. And one of the reasons why this plant might have been considered a zombie-inducing plant was because of this alkaloid scopolamine, which binds with our receptors in our brain to kind of remove all of our free will. So we can be coerced into doing kind of anything if if we've ingested this alkaloid in some form or another. Um, it was also used in divination, in many sacred rites that skilled shamans created, including initiations, divinations, and even cursing magic. So it was also said that if you slept under the Brugmansia tree, you might not wake up because the angels from that trumpet would call your soul to the other world. So you never want to sleep underneath of one. They do have a heavenly scent. They're very widely used in a lot of ornamental landscaping and come in a variety of hues and colors, but predominantly white, peaches, and pinks is what it comes in. So the next plant, many of you might be familiar with this. This is called foxglove, also known as Digitalis purpurea. And it's part of the Plantagenaceae family. It's native to Western Europe, though it's now widely cultivated, including, as an annual in a lot of places and a short-lived perennial in many other places. Um, I'm just reading my notes here. So it has a lot of different names, including fairy caps, fairy gloves, goblins thimbles is one I like. Folks glove, which is also from the where like fairies come from. They're known as the fair folk or the fey folk. But if you heard these bells ring, it was an alert to foxes that there were hunters around. And a lot of the folklore is that foxes learned how to ring the bells so that other hunters could hear. Um, You'll notice as I go through that there are some, similarities in folklore amongst many plants that we talk about, and also contradictory folklore about these plants. So for some people, planting these in your yard is surely an invitation to have fairies into your house, maybe even the devil or witches, and so you might not actually want this plant anywhere near your house. But then other people believe that this plant, if you plant it in your garden, could help protect your home. The dew collected on this plant was thought to help communicate with fairies. The little spots on the top of the um, red that you see on this white plant, and just the spots on the plant in general, was thought to be where fairies touched the plant. And you might not think fairies are necessarily spooky or scary, but they're actually quite tricky. They do a lot of magic that takes children away, and you might be familiar with the story of changelings. But these stories go back well beyond the foxglove folklore. But I think that this is kind of what informs some of the folklore that surrounds foxglove. Um, in the language of flowers, it's also been known, which, is part of the Victorian times, they had these ideas of what a flower meant and what it symbolizes, and if you wore this or you gave this flower, it meant this, that, or the other. And the language of flowers, foxglove is considered a flower of romance and love, but it's also a flower of death. And so if the flowers, if you could hear the ringing of these flowers, that meant that death was imminent. It was around. Um, this is also the picture to the left of this woman is supposed to be Hera or Flora, I mean. And was she impregnated Hera after she was upset by Mars, the god Mars. He upset them. So she impregnated her by rubbing the foxglove on her belly. If the leaves of the foxglove are strewn around a baby's cradle, it's been said to protect them from evil. But if you picked foxgloves, and especially if you brought them into home, as I mentioned earlier, it'd be like asking the devil to walk right in. And then this is a photo of, maybe the not so pretty side of fairies. And then this is a story from back in the day, that a fox named Reynard was given these flowers by the fairies to slip on his feet so that he could walk into any chicken coop he wanted and raid them without being detected. And so um, there are some other, great uses for this plant. It's has digitoxin in it, which is known as a heart medicine. There's also digital, and these are, isolated compounds within this plant that have been used in medical practices and applications, including heart medicine and preparing wounds, like binding the wound after an open wound has occurred. It was also used to ease pain and calm fevers. But in the language of flowers, it was also known as a symbol of insincerity. So if you were to give this plant to somebody or this flower bouquet to somebody, it could signify that you're actually being quite insincere in your gift giving. So now we're on to Aconitum napellus, also known as monkshood, or rocket plant, blue rocket, wolfsbane. There are over 100 different species of this plant. However, they're all toxic. Every part of this plant is toxic, from the stem to the root to the flowers to the seeds. It's been found in North America, but also Asia and parts of Europe. It's in the buttercup family, known as the Ranunculaceae family. It is said that it grows where Cerberus spit, that it grows in Hades, in the underworld. And as Hercules carried him away from the gates, Cerberus spit everywhere, and then this monk's hood popped up. This is another plant that's been, purportedly used in the flying ointments of witches. And flying ointments are an interesting topic, I guess. There's a lot of there's a lot of writing out there, let's just say, about what a flying ointment is and what it's, made out of. And there's a lot of different kinds of flying ointments. But generally, monkshood, belladonna, and henbane are the main components to a proper flying ointment. Um, and so uh, this plant has also been given to, in the Isle of Chios, which is a Greek island. It was said to be given to senile men as a form of euthanasia. It was also used as a point, like poison, to tip the arrows for the hunt, to kill wolves and other animals in the hunt. This picture on the left is a picture of Shiva, who is a Hindu god, also related to the monk's hood. It's said that he saved the world by drinking all the poisons of the world, and one of the poisons was monk's hood, and that's part of the reason why he turned blue. But also, a few drops of the poison fell out of his mouth and landed on the earth, and that's why monk's hood is here today, because Shiva wasn't able to drink all of the poisons of the world. And on the left is just sort of a depiction of um, the woman Athena, the goddess Athena, who cursed Arachne by poisoning her with monk's hood and turned her into a spider. This plant's also been considered the name after Hecate, who is the goddess of witchcraft. Berserkers used to use this plant to transform themselves into werewolves. So one of the things that happens when this plant is ingested, it's purported that the body starts to feel sort of tingly, almost as if it's growing fur, and you kind of just go insane. And so that's where the idea of werewolves came from, but also the idea of sort of banishing or warding off werewolves came from using this monk's hood. So it's quite a lot of conflicting information, but that's a lot of what happens when you're going down the rabbit hole of folklore. You have all these different cultures and places that have come up with different um, interpretations of these plants. It was banned from Roman gardens. It wasn't even able to be used or grown because of its murderous capabilities. In Alaska, it was also used to, like as a poison on the tip of harpoons to harpoon whales, and has actually been used to help with paralysis, kidney and bladder stones, and venom bites, though most people do not recommend using these plants for those things, as there's better, more modern medicine for that. This might be an interesting plant for you all. It might be a plant that you know very well, grows in your backyard on the side of houses, considered a weed. It's a pokeweed, which is also known as Phytolacca americana. It grows in North America mostly, kind of where the Americana comes from, but it's also been spread to Europe and Asia, and primarily because of just our, import-export deals that we do. It can occur, and it's a very invasive plant. It's part of the Phytolaccaceae family. Some fun and interesting facts about this family. Well, actually, it's known as dragonberry and inkberry. As you can tell from those berries, they have a lot of juice in them, and they have this beautiful color. And the Declaration of Independence was actually written in fermented pokeberry dye. Um, it's said that an infusion of pokeweed will cleanse you of hexes. And a lot of times, what hexes were like illnesses, whether that be mental, physical, maybe a combination of both illnesses, were often labeled as hexes or curses that occurred from some other, outside source. And so drinking an infusion of anything that could break a curse was generally utilizing some sort of medicinal property that maybe wasn't necessarily known at the time. Um, and so again, shamans use this to purge evil spirits. And so this plant has also has edible process. So it's toxic in all parts of it, the berries, the stems, the leaves, except for when it is a young shoot in the spring. And then those young shoots can be harvested and boiled to make what's called a poke salad. And it's generally eaten in the South. There's a song called Poke Salad Annie, or I think that's what it's called. And this is sort of this tale of, the humble families that needed to eat weeds and other food from the land instead of like from the store because they couldn't afford it. But if not cooked properly and if not harvested properly, it is toxic. It's been known to support stagnant lymphs. And there are a couple of tribes, including the Paiutes and other Rocky Mountain tribes of where I currently live, who use this plant as both a stimulant, a poultice, a muscle relaxant. Um, it's we can tell that autumn's coming when the berries start to ripen. So that's, a lot of times we forget to look at the world around us. And then when we start to look at the world, we can start to see and notice more signs. And this is one of those signs. Um, Pokeweed growing near your home can protect your house from whatever worries you. And using the ink to paint something that you're missing can actually help you find the missing thing, it's been said. And this, or many studies have been shown that this plant has antiviral properties to it. So a lot of these plants have been, used in certain applications and then purportedly, hoaxed out like, oh, that was just for hexes or that was just for like weird evil spirits and not actually anything that was real. And now we're coming to find out that there are maybe some medicinal applications to these plants, but we're still in the research stages of a lot of them. This is another weed that you might be familiar with. It's called bittersweet nightshade, also known as Solanum dulcamara. It's associated with the Slavic witch Baba Yaga, the witch of the wood. She lives in that chicken hut. And this is oftentimes, these plants are oftentimes depicted in her dress and her garb, in the landscape around her. It's primarily found in Africa, Europe, and Asia, but has also spread all around the world. Again, another one of those really pernicious weeds. It's been used as a cursing herb, used for binding magic because of that vining aspect, I imagine, is where they get that from. And it said that if you put sachets of these berries under one's pillow, that it could cure your broken heart. This plant is said to be like sweet when you first eat it and then bitter afterwards. And that's kind of where that bittersweet name comes from. But it also, I think, lends to this duality, right, of bittersweetness. Um, and this kind of represents like the love and romance aspect too. A lot of times they say this plant has been used in like Romans and the Greeks thought of it as a more romantic and love-based plant. But love can sometimes be bittersweet. So I think that that is very pertinent to this. It's also been known as felonwort or snakewort, and it's been linked to Circe, who is one of the first sort of witches to use poisonous plants as a way to transform her enemies into animals with the berries. Um, this is another one that's been used for flying ointments. If this is grown around your home, it's said to protect your livestock, and it's also known as an auspicious omen if it pops up in your garden. Um, but it's also been used to relieve skin irritations. It's been used as a dye. Um, and its toxic compound is called solanine, which causes a lot of gastrointestinal upset. It's said that 3 of these berries, and that's honestly what they say about a lot of these plants, could kill a child, but I think even one could really hurt somebody. So now we'll get into the ghastly plants. This is called Snapdragon Antirrhinum majus. Snapdragon is an interesting plant. It's also in the Plantaginaceae family. It's from the Mediterranean primarily and is used mostly as an annual. It's a highly cultivated plant these days. But the Romans and the Greeks believed that these plants would protect you from witchcraft. And you might see the resemblance of kind of a skull-looking shape to these seed heads. It was said that if you bunched snapdragons over a baby's cradle, that it could protect them from evil spirits. And again, this is another one of those plants that has a little bit of duality. In some regards, it's said to be a plant of grace, and in other regards, it's said to be a plant of deviousness. I think the deviousness kind of comes from this notion that they say that if you conceal snapdragons on your body, you become more you get more admiration or more attention, and people find you more charming and charismatic. Um, it also was said that if these flowers were boiled down into like a water, they could be used as a tonic for beauty. It also was said to stave off illnesses if it was worn as a bracelet. If you rubbed yourself with the snapdragon again, or concealed yourself with a snapdragon, you could gain that favor and beauty. Um, I think it says that this is also like a hex breaking curse, a hex breaking plant, I mean. And I think that that comes from this idea that in a German tale that said an elf cursed this woman and told her that she couldn't step on the snapdragons. And if she stepped on the snapdragons, she would die. And then she did step on the snapdragons and she didn't die. She actually broke the curse. And I think that there's some interesting stories around the, Germanic areas that say that this snapdragon is a shelter for elves, and that if we step on them, we'd actually release them from their little shelters. And it was also said that this plant could help tell what is false and what is true. So if you didn't think that somebody was telling the truth, you could give them a snapdragon. And if the snapdragon wilted, then they were lying. But if it stayed, upright, then it was, not a lie. And they're just a really beautiful plant. If you are thinking that maybe you're cursed or you're having some bad luck and you think maybe I want to reverse my bad luck, you can put some snapdragons in front of a mirror, and that is said to reverse the curse or reverse your bad luck, and it will go back to where it came from. Carnivorous plants. And so this is kind of a lump sum here, right? Because there are a lot of different kinds of carnivorous plants, a lot of different kinds of insectivores, and there's a even bigger world of you know, man-eating mythologies. So on the right here, there's a picture of what was called the Yataveo, which is a mythological plant that was said to eat people. And there are a lot of different mythological plants that were said to eat people. But Nepenthes, also known as the Venus flytrap, and Dionia, Dionia, which is known as the Venus flytrap, and Nepenthes, which is known as the pitcher plant, are some of the carnivorous plants that we know today. And what's fascinating about them is that some of them can count. So a Venus flytrap, which is native mostly to southern United States, can count. So they can take in electrical impulses and also through the calcification buildup on their leaves, can somehow manage to determine and differentiate between potential prey and something that's just fallen, like a leaf or a dead insect, for example. And they're able to tell the difference and then close their mouths like with consciousness, which I find absolutely fascinating and a little bit spooky, because if these plants have a mind of their own, what does that mean for the other plants? Um, it's called Venus flytrap because of a lot of vulgar reasons, really. The men who discovered this plant called it this because of its clam shape, but also because Venus came out of the sea from a clam, and also because Venus got into a lot of traps herself, but also set a lot of traps. This Roman goddess trapped a lot of men into marriages. She's also was trapped into some golden nets. So there's a lot of sort of why this name is what it is. Also, Dionia is the Latin for daughter of Dion, which is Aphrodite, which is the Roman equivalent, or sorry, the Greek equivalent to Venus. And so that's where we get sort of this imagery from. But it's very fascinating how they eat their prey. A lot of them are digesting these insects with acidic liquids, these breaking down these plants. With pitcher plants, they also will, attract their prey with these sweet scents, and then, they'll drop into the liquid and then sort of deteriorate from there. But these stories come from these plants have stories that are much more grandiose, where we have things like the Little Shop of Horrors or the Day of the Triffids, or these sort of giant man-eating plants, which start out very small and unassuming, start to take over. Um, there really aren't too many to the degree that we see in these sort of fantastical tales that actually can do what these fantastical tales are saying. But some of them, like the corpse flower, do have some interesting tales about them. And some of them, like the pitcher plants, can eat things as big as rats. In my research, I also found that they could potentially digest human body parts like fingers, though the nails and things would take a very long time to digest, so it wouldn't really be the best method of getting rid of a body, if you will. Um, with the corpse flower, which is this central photo here, some of you may have come to the corpse flower blooming that's happened every once in a while over at the Chicago Botanic Garden. It's said to actually have therapeutic effects on the mind just by sniffing the flower itself. It's also been said to help with with physical ailments such as stress and anxiety. Smelling the corpses and death odor really gets your mind into perspective, I guess. It's also been said that this is the embodiment of the Hindu goddess Rahu, who was the bringer of death and destruction, and has even been used in funeral rites in certain African tribes. So these plants, while not actually man-eating, have been used in a lot of ways throughout time in conjunction with man, mostly with man's imagination. All right. Now we're on to mandrake, also known as Mandragorum officinarum. This plant Mandrake can be misconstrued for a lot of other plants like May apples. However, what we're talking about here is specifically the Mandragora, which is another Mediterranean plant, which was said to have originated 20 million years ago in the Eurasian continent through like the process of birds traveling, and then split off about 10 million years ago into the different species that we now know. But this is another one of those Solanaceae families. The roots split when they grow to sort of create this similar look to both male and female forms. It was said that if you pull the roots out of this plant out of the ground, the roots will start to sweat blood and then actually let out violent screams, which would cause death. It was said that you could only harvest this under a full moon by tying the plant with a string and then connecting it to the collar of a dog and then having the dog pull the plant out of the ground. And that was really just to sacrifice the dogs, in theory. They would be the ones who would suffer from those loud screams. Um, it's also been known as man's dragon, and it has these tropane alkaloids in them, so another one of those alkaloids that can cause gastrointestinal upset and liver toxicity up to the point of death if large amounts are consumed. It was said that this plant grew in the gallows underneath the spit and blood of murderers and felons. It was also referenced in the Bible as an ingredient in love philters, which are also known as potions. It was used by Circe to turn men into swine. This was another one of Circe's magic potions to turn animals or her enemies into animals. Mostly they were men. Um, and then it helped with prophetic vision. So if if you were able to have this plant and you didn't die and you ingested it, you could be then given these hallucinations, which would tell you the truth or give you these prophetic visions. And then it was also said that if you place this plant, on an altar, you could help induce conception. This is a photo of Circe turning men into swine. And then the Greeks used this plant, the bark of this plant, which is the roots really, as a painkiller for the most part. And then these are the apples, kind of the fruit that comes from this mandragora um, plant, which is again not edible. This next one is called Taxus baccata, and it's one of my favorite plants to talk about because they're so ancient and so old. It's known as the yew tree. All parts of this plant are toxic. Its primary toxin is called taxine. Um, which has not really any purported uses that I'm aware of. But it was set to guide spirits home. And so this plant is all over Europe and churches and in these more sort of ancient historic spots to the point where their roots have actually unearthed bodies because they go so deep into the ground, which is why it's also said that they thrive on corpses. It's known as the tree of immortality to some people, and they even say that the yews bleed during Easter, as shown in this picture here. They have a sap that comes out that looks red, generally around springtime when a lot of trees are sapping. But that correspondence again is one of those sort of moments where you look at the world in a little bit of a different view, I think. The berries, birds do eat the berries, but they are toxic to humans. The wood was used to make longbows. It was planted around the home to protect from evil spirits, and it was thought that if you cut down a yew tree, it would bring negative energy to your home and to you. Um, this has a lot of symbology. This tree has a lot of symbology around death and resurrection, especially in regards to its um, intentional plantings around churches and graveyards. Um, but you should never bring yew into your home. So if you're making a wreath or you're making some Christmas decorations, it was said not to bring yew into the home because that would entail that somebody would die before the end of the year. And now we're on to devilish plants. And when I use the word devilish plants, it's generally because these plants are called devil's something, or they've been ascribed to be related to the devil in some way. This is called Datura. There's a lot of different species, Datura anoxia, Datura stramonium, Datura metal. It's a highly cultivated plant now. However, it was originally from Mexico and Central America. It's known as thorn apple, jimson weed, devil's trumpet, and moonflower. Unlike its counterpart Brugmansia, which is known as the angel's trumpet because those flowers are hanging down, this plant is called devil's trumpet because the trumpets are pointing upwards from hell. And for quite some time, Brugmansia and Datura were actually both in the same category of species. They were both known as Datura, but then they determined that Brugmansia was its own species. But this is another one of those Solanaceae family members, and another one of those plants that was considered used in witches' ointments for, flying ointments. It was also known as a plant that you could use the oils for shape shifting and love potions. It's also pollinated by moths and bats. It has a heavenly scent at night. I've been growing this plant for years in a variety of landscapes from Florida to Chicago to Denver, and it is by far one of my favorite plants ever. Um, but it has a lot of negative associations with it. It's said to the devil is always near when this plant is blooming, and that if you were to consume this plant, um, you would have horrific hallucinations. It's been used though for over 3,000 years in a variety of shamanistic rituals, mostly in the form of a beverage, in order to have communication with spirits and those who are no longer with us. In the Caribbean, it was used as a ritual, it was used as an ingredient in this ritual practice known as zombification. And in that area in the Caribbean, it's known as a zombie cucumber. So again, that's because this plant has that scopolamine in it. It also has atropine, those alkaloids that I was talking about earlier, which can cause all kinds of loss of faculties and willpower. Georgia O'Keeffe uses Datura in a lot of her artwork, and the name thornapple comes from the way that the seed pods dry after the flowers bloom. And now devil's claw. And devil's claw is a fun one because it's a family of plants. It's not just one kind of plant. It's the Harpagophytum and Proboscideae Martinaceae family. So there's a couple of different, and we'll go back to this photo. So you have two different species here. You have the kind of claw, and then you have the kind of like multi sort of pronged one. Both of these are known as devil's claw. They come from a variety of places, but it's a perennial herb, primarily native to South Africa, but also parts of Central and South America as well, mostly desert areas. And they were originally dispersed by large giant animals, like back in the prehistoric days, and are now generally a nuisance to livestock. They get into the hooves and of the cattle and things like that and really cause damage. But the claws themselves, when they're dried and hung, have been known to ban spirits and protect homes. They have also been used in dyes and as a weaving, as a like a needle for weaving. So this is kind of an example of one of the pieces of art that some indigenous tribes made in Africa, of using the devil's claw. It's also known as wood spider and has been known to help with pain and arthritis in some regards. And we have this plant at the Denver Botanic Garden in some of our areas as well. All right. Now we have Atropa belladonna, also known as devil's cherries. This is another one of those Solanaceae families. Um, this plant is a perennial herb which has been native to mostly West Asia, but also Europe and now parts of North America. Not only is it known as devil's cherries, but it's also known as Bologna or Atropos, which means the unturning one, which is one of the three fates. Bologna was the goddess of war, and this was also brewed in a beer at one point, along with henbane. This is a picture of Bologna. These are those black devil's cherries. They're just such a beautiful looking berry. It does make me want to eat it. People use this plant to the Romans and the Greeks use this plant as like an eye drop, to kind of dilate the eyes and make them more doe-like. It was used mostly by women. And for a long time, it was also still used in a lot of eye doctors would use it to dilate the eyes for a while. Um, it was said that if you use this, like if you brewed a concoction, you could use it in necromancy if you drank it, or if you bathed the dead in it, it would help you revive the dead. It was used to like point or like poison swords and spears and things like that to help destroy enemies. Because again, this is another one of those plants that has scopolamine in it and a lot of those toxic alkaloids. The leaves were used in smoking blends to create hallucinatory experiences. And it was said that if you let a black rooster out, it would remove the devil's always around these plants, supposedly. And it would kind of lure the devil away because, of course, he wants that black rooster. And it would leave the plant unguarded so that you could harvest it more safely. Because if you tried to harvest it when you didn't let a black rooster out, who knows what could happen? You could definitely meet the devil. Um, and then finally, last but not least, we've got our not quite plants. So the first one is ghost pipe, Monotropa uniflora. And this plant comes from the Monotropiaceae family. It's widely regarded as a endangered species. It's a parasitic plant. So it actually grows in, it's not really a plant, not really a fungus. It's some kind of hybridized in between spot. And it's said to be able to heal a broken heart. These pink stems and the hanging head is sort of to show the sadness and brokenheartedness. But in some Cherokee folklore, it said that its hanging head is actually believed to be because of its wickedness. Um, Monotropo means once turned or single flower. And so that's what this, each one of these is its own little parasite. Um, so in the Cherokee folklore it was said that this particular species was created out of selfishness, that these warring tribes smoked a pipe out of peacetime. And when they did that, this plant popped up out of the ground and wreaked sort of this massive havoc on these tribes, causing illness and famine because they were smoking when they shouldn't have been. And so then that's why they came back together and they have these, you know, pipe smoking ceremonies. This plant looks a little bit like those from the TV show Stranger Things, the demigorgons I kind of see. There are many different species of this plant too, by the way. And when they're harvested, they turn black because they're bruising. Emily Dickinson had a fond relationship with this plant and she saw it as the plant of life. However, it has some medicinal qualities, including more of like a tonic for nervous disorders and other kind of anxiety disorders. And then some of my favorite spooky plants, which are not plants at all, but fungi, is this Hydellum pecii, which is also known as the bloody-toothed mushroom or bleeding tooth fungus. It's in the Bankeraceae family. It looks a lot like blood, but it's actually non-toxic. It's a toothed mushroom. I just want to say first and foremost, there are so many spooky mushroom plants or mushrooms out there, not plants, I'm sorry, that I could have gone on a whole other tangent on. But this is just one of the ones that I think is really spooky. It's said to attract vampires, but it unfortunately has no magical uses. It is a symbiotic plant, so like many mushrooms and fungi, it helps break down in the area that it's been growing in. It also provides food and shelter for a lot of other arthropods and insects. Here's another close-up. You can see that toothed fungus comes from the very bottom where all these little kind of like hanging fuzzy looking things are coming from. Those are its teeth. And then we have our fairy butter, witch's butter, wood ears, and jelly fungus. These are common names for a variety of fungus in several different families that grow on oaks and birches and a lot of downed and dead wood. it was said that careless fairies dropped butter that they were carrying back to their homes after churning all night, and that's why we have these fairy butters. They come in all different colors, black, pinks, reds, browns, yellows. Um, it's said that it's lucky to eat, but a lot of butters are not very tasty. A lot of them aren't even really like they don't really have flavors at all. They're used in a lot of um Asian cooking, especially in like soups and hot pots and things like that. But it was said that if you find witch's butter on your door frame, you've been hexed by a witch. It's really kind of uncanny how much they do look like ears, though. And not all of them are um, going to be found in the same place. Not all of them are going to be in the same family, but they all have um, that weird ear shape. So it was said that if you poke a straight pin into the butter, you could break any curse. So if you have that, you find some jelly ears on your door, you could poke a straight pin through it and that would break the curse. It was also said that jelly ears are the reincarnate of Judas because they grow mostly on elder, which is what Judas hung himself from. Though, as I mentioned, jelly ears and witch's butter grow on a variety of wood. Um, and so that is my presentation. I'm happy to, if we have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm super happy to be able to share all the spookiness with you.
I have to say that your PowerPoints are gorgeous. Like,
Oh, thank you.
it's such a weird thing to say, but like, they're like cinematic almost. It's really cool.
Yeah. I learned that people like pictures more than they like words, so that's always nice
Yeah,
too.
it was good to see all those examples. So that was very cool. Do you have a favorite that you like that trumpet one the best?
Well, that's funny that you ask. So the datura is one of my favorite plants, just like as a plant. But if I was to go with like what my favorite spooky plant is, it's actually the snapdragon because it's such an unassuming, like sweet and lovely looking plant. But then like when fall comes and it's like dried and you get those seed pods, it's like very not pretty and like very scary looking. So
Yeah,
I think that one's probably my favorite.
it really did look like skulls, so that was cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't see any chats coming in, so I think
All
we can
right.
probably call it an evening.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
again. Love sharing this with you and have a great
Yeah.
evening.
Take care, everybody.